What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to talk about my Dauntless. I get a lot of questions on this stove on Reddit, on YouTube. I made a video, I think when we first got the stove, just talking about how it operates, I like it or not, stuff like that. Talk about it a little bit today. I know there's going to be stuff that I probably don't mention within the video, which you guys can comment down below and I will answer every single question that you have to the best of my ability. I want to talk about this wood stove. We've been using it for about 3 years now. I didn't clean the glass today. I cleaned it a couple days ago, something like that. It's also really hot. Well, not really hot, but it's toasty near it, and I don't want to sweat my butt off, so I'm going to, I guess, hold the camera or talk or something like that. Hold on one second. This stove, I will talk about kind of everything that I possibly can with it. Definitely, if you guys have any questions, just comment down below. I got this stove 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Main reason I got it in our house is 2,400 square feet, if I remember correctly. We have no gas or propane or anything like that. We only have the baseboard heat, which is electric, and it is very, very expensive. The first year we lived here, we were paying over $1,000 a month to heat the house, and it wasn't even heating the house correctly. It would turn off sometimes. We would have issues where end up pulling too much power and it would trip a breaker, so I'd have to go downstairs, flip the breaker, all that stuff. It was just so difficult to deal with, and it kind of sucks. I mean, the thing that we liked at first was that, hey, we can control the climate of each specific room. They generally put in thermostats into each room, which makes it easy to control the temperature of each room. We get really cold winters. We're in Massachusetts. Sometimes, I mean, especially like last year, we had a winter where a couple days were just like negative 40 degrees with the wind chill. It was absolutely insane. Just, there is no possible way. So the first year, Cameron was a baby. When we had an issue where the breaker kept tripping and I couldn't get it to just stay with all the heat that we were trying to produce. And so we ended up, I actually went to my neighbor's house and asked them if Jackie and Cameron could stay over there just for an hour or so I could figure out what's going on. I basically had to turn off the heat in a couple different areas of the house to be able to heat the main floor where we are currently. It was just such a big issue. And so I was talking to my dad one day and I was like, Dad, you know, I'm paying over $1,000 a month just to heat the house. I mean, within the months that we're heating, I mean, I'm paying, and it's generally around like 5 to 6 months that we're using the stove. It's generally the end of October to the beginning-ish of April, sometimes the middle, when we kind of cut it all off. We were heating from those months, and it was just so expensive, and like I don't want to pay that much for heat. It just didn't make sense. So I was talking to my dad, and my dad was saying, hey, you know, you grew up with a wood stove, why don't you get a wood stove? And I was like, I don't really know what stove to go with, you know, size and all this stuff. And like, I grew up with a wood stove and I loved it as a kid because you go downstairs, my dad would always have me, because I used to wake up early in the morning. I would wake up around 4:30, 5 o'clock because I wanted to watch Captain Planet. My dad told me if I'm gonna wake up that early, then it's my responsibility to start the fire in the morning. So when my parents come down around 6:30, 7 o'clock, I have the house completely warm. And also it's cold during that time, so I would prefer to have a fire. So yeah. So my dad suggested, hey, Patrick, why don't you go look at a wood stove? Him and I went to a company and looked at stoves. I was looking at Hearthstone. I was looking at Blaze King, a couple other different brands as well. The main thing that got me on Vermont casting was, one, I always used a Vermont casting stove. My parents had one. It was super old, but they loved that stove. And I grew up with that stove. It was like, I mean, by the time I moved out to go to college, it was at least like 20 years old, 20, yeah, it was about 20 years old. And they still used it every winter. Got the stove, had the company install it. It was sometime around December when they installed it. I had wood delivered, all that fun stuff. And so I only got to use it basically halfway through that season because we got it installed towards like the end of December. And I mean, it worked, you know. When getting a new stove, you're worried about tons of stuff. You're worried about if it was installed correctly, if you know, you're gonna operate it in an efficient way, if you can do all this stuff. And so I was getting used to it the first half, and then the following year was my first full season with it, and I got really used to it. I got you know, to the point where I was running it overnight efficiently. I was getting to the point where, you know, I knew, okay, I can load it up and then I have X amount of time until I have to come back and reload it. Yeah, so got to that point. Now I'm at a point where I basically know the stove inside and out, what to put in it, what not to put in it, what time to put certain species of wood in it and everything like that. So my first recommendation is that the stove is great. I love the stove. Stove is super convenient. It heats the house very quickly. I also want to say that I can't give you a definitive time on, you know, how long you're gonna get a burn out of it, because every person is different, every house is different, every stove is different. It's just, you got to think of so many variables. Some people live in areas where they only have softwood, which obviously burns quicker than hardwoods. Hardwoods are very plentiful in my area. I basically only burn hardwoods. I burn softwood too, like spruce, hemlock sometimes, but that's mainly if my tree guy just delivers it to me. I will sometimes burn it outside, and then if I have extra, I'll burn it inside. I mainly burn it inside for kindling, but sometimes I'll just burn it in shoulder seasons and stuff like that, because I don't want to end up using like my oak or my maple or anything like that. Me personally, my house, the way that it heats, so my house, I'm currently in the living room, that's where the stove is. It will heat upstairs, and once it heats upstairs to a certain point, then it will start heating the kitchen area and the other guest room. It's kind of like a weird layout, so it always goes upstairs first, and then you start to feel the heat within like the dining room and kitchen and stuff like that. Generally in the morning, I'll start the stove. If I haven't run it overnight, I will start the stove around like 6:30. By about 8 o'clock, the house is at a comfortable temperature. Sometimes you'll come down, especially if it's really cold and it's like 50 something degrees. I also have this. I bought it off Amazon. It comes with a little light on it. If I just blinded you, I'm sorry. It comes with a little light, but it tells me what the temperature is inside. Currently it's 71 degrees. I'm running the stove currently on like a lower setting just because it's 41 degrees outside right now, and I don't want the house to be like a billion degrees. The stove can heat, which is amazing, but main thing you want to think about too is, yes, sometimes oversized depending on your house layout, but you also got to consider if you live in a house that's 1,000 square feet and you're looking at a Dauntless, which I believe is made to heat around 2,000 square feet, give or take, or 1,800 square feet. You got to think like, you're gonna get really hot in your house unless you live in an area where you're getting just constant cold. Like if you're living in like Alaska or Canada or something like that, like you gotta think, okay, my winters sometimes I get down to like negative 30 or negative 40. We've gotten those temperatures before, but generally we're sitting around like 30 degrees for the high, 35 degrees for the high in like the dead of winter. Some days we'll have like wind chill where it feels like 20 degrees or 15 degrees, but last year was nuts. I mean, there was a stretch where it was just like, I mean, it was negative like 37, 38, 40 degrees, and I basically was just stoking the fire the whole time, just making sure that, you know, we were just warm in the house. And I mean, even that time, like our house is older. It was built in the 80s, I believe. The windows are original, so it's not super efficient. You do have to at some point change out the windows to get more efficiency out of the windows and stuff like that. But the stove heats to a point where like we really don't feel any kind of legitimate draft. I mean, if you stand like right next to the window on a cold day, you can actually like feel a little bit of the cold, which kind of sucks, but we'll figure that out at some point. The stove is great. The way we have it set up, and this was another thing, so in our stove, as you can see, it's built outside of the fireplace. There's obviously no reason for it to be back in there, because if it was, then we wouldn't be able to use the top load feature, which is right here. That was a big selling point for me. I don't mind front load stoves, but main thing for me is when you open it and you have a lot of coals or you have a lot of ash, sometimes it will build up against the door, and then when that happens, you open the door and sometimes it will fall out on you or fall out onto the floor. And obviously that's why you have hearth pads or you have a hearth built, so if it does come out, you don't run into issues. But my big thing is like I like to not worry about that stuff, and so that's why the top load feature is a big thing for me, where I can just, you know, pick up a log, drop it in, do whatever I need to do, and I don't have to worry about anything, which is amazing. Second thing, so My stove is the non-catalytic combustor stove, whatever you call it. Personally, I've always had stoves. My parents have always had stoves. My grandfather always had stoves without those. I told myself when we were buying the stove that I'm gonna try it without the catalyst, and if I realize halfway through the burn, or I realize that, you know, at some point my burn times are just awful and I cannot just get like 2 hours out of the stove without having to reload it, then yeah, I was gonna go for the catalyst. First, I was gonna address everything with the stove first. So my wood quality, if I have the air open, closed, stuff like that, how hot I'm burning, the amount of coals I had, like just all the variables you could possibly think of first. To my surprise, I mean, the first like season and a half, I was kind of all over the place. Like I was getting really good burn times sometimes, and then not so much the other times. I was also buying wood at that point. I don't want to say like firewood sellers are sometimes not very truthful, but and I'm not saying this is like every single firewood seller. There are tons of firewood sellers that are actually legitimate people, and they will actually sell you seasoned wood, which is amazing. But some of them will say, hey, it's semi-seasoned, and semi-seasoned means it's sat in log form for X amount of time, and then they cut it, and then they sold it to you. That's generally what semi-seasoned mean. Or if they cut it at some point and let it sit for 4 months or a couple months and then sell it to you. I think if you're gonna do that, you need to be very upfront with what you're selling to somebody. Because for me in the beginning, like, yes, I grew up with wood stoves, but my dad generally was the person that kind of took care of everything. He was just like, hey, go cut this wood, go do this, whatever, and I did that. But I wasn't really worried about, you know, how long it's been sitting. My dad basically said, hey, go to that pile, that's the wood you're gonna use this year, and we just called it like that. So when I was doing it myself, when I call a firewood seller and I'm like, hey, do you have this? And they're like, yeah, it's semi-seasoned. I'm like, oh, yeah, that should be fine, I'm not worried about it. Or they'll say, oh yeah, it will burn, you don't have to worry about anything. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, fine. I was running into issues where sometimes I would just like smolder my fire, or you would hear that horrible hissing sound, meaning it's just wet wood, or you just run into like so many issues, and it was just like I was getting tired of it. I didn't want to have to worry about buying wood from someone, depending on somebody, and then if I ran out of wood, I was like, oh my god, I have to call them in the middle of winter or towards the end of the year when I don't really need wood, but I do kind of want wood. That was my big thing. I didn't want to have to worry about talking to somebody to bring me wood, worrying about if it was seasoned, if it was cut to the length I need. I mean, the Dauntless will take comfortably 16 inches. You can fit 18, but it's kind of weird the way you gotta fit it. So I generally go for 16 inches. That's a big thing for me. I wanna be able to place my wood in there. And I got to a point where I was just tired of like calling people to bring me wood and scheduling stuff. I didn't want to do it anymore. Contacted a couple tree companies, and it was a little bit difficult, but I finally found a guy that is willing to basically bring me logs whenever I ask for them, for the most part. Super great guy. You know, we talk all the time and everything like that about stuff that's not even related to, you know, him just bringing me wood. I bought a log splitter, which you guys have seen in previous videos, and if you haven't, go check those out. But I bought a log splitter. I also hand split a lot of my wood too. And I just wanted to be able to just burn the wood, split it the way that I want. I cut the wood, so I know personally that, you know, this has been sitting for 2 years, or this has been sitting for a year, or this has been sitting for 6 months or whatever. And I mean, right now, like, I have enough wood for about 2 years-ish, 2.5, maybe 3 years. And that was a big thing for me. I wanted, and also when you buy from sellers, you're basically just dealing with whatever size they cut their wood. So I burn wood for heat. So I want generally bigger chunks of wood. So I don't have to worry about certain things. I want to be able to throw like 2 big logs in there and know, hey, those are gonna last all day. If I don't need like a, you know, a really hot fire, it's not that cold out, but I want to take the chill out of the house, you know, maybe just throw in like a couple smaller pieces or anything like that. But when you're doing that stuff, it's difficult to like tell sellers that, hey, I need some big, some small, some medium, stuff like that. So I just cut all my stuff now. what I mainly burn in the stove, since I have a lot of hardwoods in my area, I have basically everything you could possibly think of. What I mainly like to burn is oak, maple, birch, beech, spruce, pine, some pines. But those are mainly what I like to burn in the stove. Obviously, you can just burn the densest wood that you have in your area. I know out west, they have a lot of softer woods, and like Douglas fir and soft maple is basically the best stuff they have. Burn whatever you have. Don't worry about, you know, hey, I can't burn pine in my stove. Yes, you can. You can burn pine in your stove. It makes great kindling. It makes great firewood if that's all you have. Just burn whatever you have in your area. That's it. The stove itself will take whatever you throw in it, as long as you have a good coal bed and you make sure that everything you're burning is seasoned and you're burning hot enough where you don't have to worry about creosote and stuff like that. That's really it. You don't have to worry about anything else. If I load it up overnight, the way I load it, I generally try to save my oak and like hardest woods, like my hickory and stuff like that. Those I generally have like overnight logs. They're some pretty big logs, and I'll throw like 2 of those in there, maybe 3 if I can stuff it in there, and I'll let it burn. You know, I'll basically burn it like not wide open, but close to wide open, and I'll burn it. I'll make sure that it is just, you know, everything's catching, and I don't have to worry about when I turn it, you know, lower, that it's going to smolder. Let it low once everything's caught. I watch the fire, make sure everything's, you know, still burning, doing well. I wait about 20-30 minutes just to make sure, and then I go to bed. And generally I'll wake up in the morning and some of the logs will still be burning, or I'll just have coals, and either way I can just throw in, sometimes if it's really low, I'll just take like a couple pieces of my pine and I'll just throw that in there along with like some maple or something, like a less harder wood that I have, and thing fires right up. Love the stove. My whole install with the stove was about $6 grand, a little bit over that, and for me, that's 1 season of heat. Stove already paid for itself, for me personally. If you're someone that has electric heat and that's the only thing you have, look for a wood stove. I mean, I get all my wood from this tree service for free. He's an amazing guy. He cuts tons and tons of wood, and he doesn't want to have to pay disposal fees or anything like that. He is a little bit farther from me, but I generally try to like tell him, hey, if you're bringing me like a bigger load or whatever, some like premium stuff where it's not like super twisted and stuff like that, like I'll give you gas money or something. I don't know. He doesn't like to take it from me, but I try to just sneak it to him and just say, hey, don't worry about it. You're helping my family out. And I like to work out. As far as the stove goes, 8 to 10 hour burn times, give or take, without the catalyst. I have it set on low, so it's just kind of burning low right now. And I just threw in, I think I threw in like 2 oak logs, and there's still some burning in there. This is the rack that I have next to it. There's some kindling, and then my ash bucket right there. I have this wood powered, if you can see it, this wood powered, or not wood powered, this heat powered fan. It works okay. I use it sometimes, but honestly, like I just do it all natural. It all just goes wherever it needs to go. These are like small chunks that were like too short to be obviously 16 inches. I'll use those to like get the fire going in the morning because they're smaller pieces, but they're still kind of bigger, so I can get coals out of them if I don't run the stove overnight. But all this stuff, it's all a mix. I mean, you can tell it's very well seasoned. The bark's coming off. This is some ash, maple, oak. I think there might be a little bit of hickory and elm in this pile. I mean, it's an amazing stove. The top load feature is just great. I love the stove so much. It's already paid for itself, and Jackie loves the stove too. If I were to recommend the stove, yes, I would recommend it wholeheartedly. I think any person that's looking for a stove should consider it. Vermont Castings makes amazing stoves. I know there are tons of people that say the stove is garbage and they hate it, or they couldn't figure out, you know, the controls or whatever. I mean, I never had issues. My sister has an Encore because where she has her stove, she has kind of a bigger open room, and she has kind of like a weird layout, so it's harder for her to heat certain areas. So she wanted a bigger stove to accommodate that, and sometimes in those cases that makes more sense. But our houses are generally about the same square footage. I'm gonna close out the video. I know there's probably some things that I didn't go over, but yeah, just comment down below. I'll answer everything that you possibly could ask within reason. Obviously, if there's certain things that I don't know, I will try and answer them the best I can. But I'm gonna close out the video. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.